heavily with our broker partners when designing ICHRAs, because the objective is, yes, we want to solve the short-term pain points, but also we want to look at the long-term strategy as it relates to adopting an ICHRA. And it really helps our broker partners show and position that value proposition in this new employee benefits strategy. I'm also very excited to have Heather McCamey on today. Heather is the founder of HMAC Advisors. And Heather, you've really built your career on the complexities of the Medicare space, employee benefits, healthcare strategy, what have you. And one thing I've really enjoyed about working with you is your very practical, no-nonsense approach and deep expertise when it comes to the Medicare landscape. Because in general, I think it's something that obviously we're well aware of. We know that there's parts A through Z plus, but you've done a really great job of positioning yourself as a trusted advisor to employers, brokers, and the likes of Savvy and other folks that operate in this space. So, Heather, what else before we jump in, I'm sure I didn't nearly do you justice, but would love to have you kind of give an introduction and outline of who you are as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to be here. Welcome, everybody. Happy to see so many people jump on this call because I do feel like it is an area of an ICHRA transition that doesn't get enough airtime. So I'm so excited to talk about that for, the next 40 minutes today. My name, like Mary Margaret said, is Heather McCamey. I come to this space, this ICHRA space, from a very non-traditional background. Typically, when somebody says Medicare, they feel like the person's been a Medicare agent, right? That is not my journey at all to get me to this point. I actually was a VP of HR at a healthcare company that implemented an ICHRA strategy about 5 years ago. It was a large employer. We were out of options in the traditional group medical environment. And so we kind of jumped off the ICHRA cliff and landed very well for the most part, but completely missed the impact that an ICHRA has on Medicare. And so what started me on this path is, the experience that the Medicare-eligible employees had when we first rolled out an ICHRA, and just really kind of dedicated myself to do that better for other people that are going to go through the transition. So excited to talk about our real world experience and what we do, and maybe offer some tips and tricks to everybody on the call.
So Heather, that's a super interesting background to bring to this, because you have both the in the weeds view of Medicare as well as, hey, we implemented one of these, so I know what it's like to be in the driver's seat when it comes to navigating as an individual, picking my own health insurance. So with that said, one of the big things that we've noticed over the last several years is that Medicare is by far and away consistently one of the most misunderstood parts of the ICHRA strategy and causes a lot of anxiety. And I don't think it's because people aren't smart. I don't think it's because brokers and HR teams don't care. It's because Medicare and employee benefits have historically lived in completely different worlds. Now, with the big uptick in ICHRA, a lot of employers moving on to this strategy, we're seeing these worlds aggressively collide. So kind of to set the stage for everybody today, we're looking to simplify that conversation. So although it would be great, our goal is not to turn everybody into a Medicare expert in 45 minutes. Our goal is really to help you understand a couple items. The first being, why does Medicare matter in an ICHRA in general? What are the basics of Medicare and ICHRA? What are some common employee confusion points? Where's the broker opportunity with this? And then finally, what does a successful rollout look like with an ICHRA and the change management in general that goes with ICHRA, but specifically for those folks that fall into that Medicare kind of cohort? So Heather, where I want to kind of start out is, why does Medicare matter within an ICHRA? Because from our experience, the Medicare age folks have historically been kind of that emotional leadership portion group of the company where if a rollout goes poorly, everybody hears about it. But if it goes well, they can actually be the group of employees that really champion this and champion the entire organization through the change management.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I would agree 100% with that. It's interesting. You kind of touched on it. In the employer world, you never have to deal with Medicare, right? There's a notice that goes out once a year to all the people, so they know that they have credible coverage when you're in a group setting, but that's it. With ICHRA, it just collides is a great word. Just absolutely collides with each other. Um, and you have to pay special attention to the employees that are eligible for Medicare because those are historically the ones that have been around the organization for a long time. They have a lot of tenure. They've become the informed leaders in the workplace, and that you want them to have a great experience in order for the rest of the team to have a great experience. Because if they do not feel supported or excited about the change, or they don't understand the impact it's going to have on them personally, every single person in that organization is going to hear about it. So you just want to make sure that you're paying attention to those people. Um, I think of it more. We spend a lot of time looking at deadlines, when we're doing an implementation. What's the deadline? What's the spreadsheet I have to have? What's the financial impact? What are the milestones? We don't spend a lot of time sitting back and going, how is going to feel about this, and how can we address that up front? So it's a good transition for them. I would encourage everybody to think of it not just as, a renewal, and what do we have to do from a compliance standpoint, but really it is a change management initiative within inside an organization, which comes with its own complexities that need to be considered.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. That kind of leads us into, the basics of Medicare and ICHRA rules, which I think is a good place to start. And, some on this call, this may be a moment question I'm going to ask, but I do really want to start from the basics. So, Heather, when we talk about Medicare and ICHRA, what portion of the population does this impact? And what's the major shift that they'll experience comparatively to their prior group health plan?
Yeah, what we see, it's roughly 10% of the overall employee population that's eligible for medical insurance, right? So it is a small portion of the population at a company, but nonetheless, every bit is important because I think they feel the most disruption in the process. So some changes that they aren't necessarily educated on at the start of the process. Those are things like they're not getting kicked off. Their employer is not kicking them off of their medical insurance. It's actually a regulation that they can't have an individual plan that accompanies it. So that's first and foremost, misunderstanding that piece of it. Probably I would say the next big piece is they no longer have deductions taken out of their paycheck, right? There's a financial shift in the way they pay for their medical insurance. They do that out of their pocket and then get a true reimbursement from the company versus, well, whatever I owe that the company, isn't covering, it's just going to come out of my paycheck. That is completely different. So that's a big shift for them as well. And then also just understanding what's eligible for reimbursement. Sometimes that takes a while to kind of get them to understand what's getting reimbursed and what isn't getting reimbursed.
Yeah. No, I think that's spot on, because I think one of the big points is most on the call are aware you got Part A, B, C, D, Medigap premiums, what have you. And that really goes back to how the ICHRA plan documents are written. And, being sure that you're familiarized as a broker, you're familiarizing your employer with that as well. And then per the rule of thumb with anything relating to Medicare, giving yourself enough runway to be able to sort through things, because there could and oftentimes are, pieces that are just confusing, causing a little bit of anxiety. And your biggest success metric there to be able to get through that successfully is going to be more time versus less.
Mm-hmm.
Heather, one thing that we also hear is, how does Social Security factor into Medicare and ICHRA, and specifically kind of that cadence of payments?
Yeah, so if an employee is already on Social Security, meaning they're getting payments from Social Security, a lot of times your groups will think Social Security and Medicare are the same thing. So it's important to make that distinction that Social Security is the money you get from the government, Medicare is what you're paying to have that benefit. So if they're getting money in the form of Social Security, their Medicare premiums for Part B historically are taken directly out of their Social Security check. Okay, so it's automatically deducted out of their Social Security check. The other thing to keep in mind is if they are getting Social Security payments, they are likely already enrolled in Part A. And so would only need to consider enrolling in their Part B if their company's moving to an ICHRA. So a lot of times if they have Social Security, it's actually beneficial because it automatically is withdrawn. They don't have to worry about making that payment to the government. It is a monthly deduction from their check. If they do not have Social Security payments, that employee will receive a bill for their Part B premium, and it is a quarterly bill. And so it's typically 3 months that they're getting. Right now, the Medicare Part B premium for most people that have the benefit is $202.90 a month. So they're getting a bill for over $600 that they, that's a crunch, right? That's a cash crunch for some people. So that's probably the thing that we're upfront about the most when we're working with a client is we get that message out to them right away that you are going to pay for these premiums up front. Your employer is going to reimburse you tax-free, but let's talk about the cash crunch and are you prepared to do that? Because if not, we need to come up with a way that we can get you through this transition. So yeah, you have the 3 months and then you have a 1 month of whatever other plans you're putting in place, either a supplement or a Medicare Advantage or a prescription drug plan. So it can have some upfront ramifications for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's been kind of one of the kludginess, if you will, is that quarterly payment aspect, because when we talk about ICHRA in general, we're used to, monthly premiums and that being kind of clockwork, where this is the group that's a little bit of the outlier. And so again, going back to education is key here. Having enough runway to be able to get out in front of this is extremely helpful, and one that I'd say is non-negotiable. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as brokers, it's a great idea to have the conversation with your client. They'll more than likely know who their Medicare eligible people are. And is the company willing to maybe do an extra reimbursement? Can that be worked out if the employee absolutely does not have the cash to lay out to get started on their medical plan? If there's a way that the employer can help with that transition, maybe have your HR person develop a policy so everybody's kind of on the same page. But then there is a resource and the employee doesn't take that as hard because they know that the company cares enough to have thought through that.
Yeah.
And you as the broker can give them that guidance.
Without a doubt. I want to move then in just to kind of walk through our agenda. I'm going to make kind of the hard shift into another topic that we hear and there's a lot of confusion on as it relates to Medicare, and that's Medicare secondary payer rules. I'll just refer to them to MSP, but this I think gets a lot of conversation going, but there's still a lot of questions about who does this apply to, what do I need to look out for, what have you. So to start kind of in a nutshell, MSP rules ultimately determine whether Medicare pays first or your employer-sponsored health coverage pays first, assuming you have both types of coverage. So the answer really to this is there's a couple things to look out for. The answer is you have to look out for factors like whether you're still working and the size of your employer. The reason why that we want to talk about this and kind of call this out is getting this wrong has the potential to lead to things like coverage gaps, penalties, and then also unexpected medical bills, all obviously negatives. But really, when we talk about MSP rules, the big fundamental you want to keep in mind and rule of thumb is who pays first, who is the primary payer, who pays second, who is the secondary payer. So when we talk about, size of employer, this really falls into two buckets. Really, it's the under 20 or over 20 employees, because these rules can differ significantly depending on employer size, which, Heather, is why we need to take in mind individual circumstances when you're, reviewing and before you're advising an employee on what they should do. When I think of common mistakes that are made, or things maybe that our broker partners aren't specifically thinking about, it's assuming that everyone over 65 should enroll in Medicare. It's not kind of paying attention to those potential Part B penalties, not taking into consideration the size of the employer and whether, what the rule stack is for MSP as it relates to employer size. And then the one that probably really I would highlight here is a big mistake is looking and treating Medicare-aged folks, eligible folks, differently than other employers. That is an absolute no-go, and that's why it's really important when you're designing your ICHRA strategy to make sure that you're keeping this in mind so you're not accidentally, pushing people onto Medicare or treating them differently. That's definitely going to fall into a compliance area that you don't want to mess with. So when I think of best practices, high level here for broker partners that are taking a look at this and initially advising their clients on how does this fall into the ICHRA strategy, very important that you understand the employer size, asking questions around active versus retired employees, documenting employee decisions that are being made. And then, Heather, going back to you again, one of the things we found very helpful is that when these items come up, having and referring Medicare-specific questions to licensed Medicare agents like yourself, who are the subject matter experts in this. Utilize those types of resources because there's no expectation that brokers in general are subject matter experts on Medicare. I really view our broker partners as strategists on employee benefit strategies for their clients. And then kind of the last thing I'd say is standardized educational materials. We want to make sure that everybody's getting the same messaging, everybody's being treated the same, and we're not causing confusion by different materials or conversations that are going on within this cohort. But in terms of best practices or mistakes, is there anything you would specifically add to that list that maybe I didn't cover?
No, I think really going back to just understanding what the client needs and what the individual needs, that it's not just like a blanket situation for everybody. We have people that, we work with that have late enrollment penalties because they missed a deadline, right? And they don't know what to do with that. We have people that get late enrollment penalty notices that they shouldn't. And so, you have to help them appeal that and get rid of that late enrollment penalty. Really helping them understand the why behind it as well, I think is very important. That they know why you're asking them to take these steps and why it's going to be good for them in the end. So yeah, I think that you've hit all the highlights, but really just making it an individual process as much as having the process down, trying to make it feel individual for those people as well is important.
Yeah. When I think MSP rules in general could be a webinar in and of itself. So. Yeah. That could be a along to this. But I want to move over into kind of the employee side because obviously that's at the core of what we're talking about here in the change management of I'm used to how a traditional group health plan is operated. Now all of a sudden I'm making this transition potentially to Medicare. What is this all about? So from our experience, it really comes down to the employee's actual experience because this is really where implementations either are a home run or it is an aggressive fall flat on our face and potentially can't really recover from this. So I'd love for you to talk about what are from your perspective, what are the common confusion points, whether that be things like the penalties, whether that be enrollment, open enrollment windows, Medicare approval timelines, what have you. I'm sure the list could be about 1,000 things, but what are kind of the top items that really we should shed some light on that we should just be aware of?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost is people underestimate the emotion that comes with that employee when they hear that their company is doing insurance differently, right? And so that's, just really recognizing that is the first thing. Allowing enough time is, I can't stress that enough. Because here's the reality. If a company decides at the last minute to move to an ICHRA, the Medicare eligible employee has to go through the enrollment process with Social Security. Everybody knows that, how quickly that can happen, right? It does vary by state. So if you're in Florida, great. That typically flies through. If you're in a different state, doesn't necessarily happen that way. So, there's that we talk about open enrollment windows, and that Medicare eligible employee hears open enrollment and they're used to hearing, okay, I have to have everything done in the 2-week window, right? They panic because they know they're not going to get all their Medicare in place in 2 weeks. So I think one tip that I would give the brokers is start using language like open enrollment for, if you're going to do the enrollment through the Savvy platform. These are your open enrollment windows. If you're going to be working with a Medicare advisor, this is when you have to have all of that wrapped up. And so they know that they have extra time, and that kind of takes that panic off a little bit. And I think just really educating them up front about, what to expect. I think that there should be a very clear document that can be handed to that employee so they know the steps. It's a multi-step process. So just here is the path that you're going to go down. These are the steps you're going to take. And here is a resource that we have for you to use in order to help you with that transition. I would say, working with a third party administrator like Savvy, I would vet that Medicare side. What resources do you have to support the Medicare people specifically? So, and what resources do they have for those people? Because it's really about getting to them quickly, diffusing their anxiety, and making sure they're ready to listen, right? And start the journey.
Yeah, absolutely agree. One thing that's top of mind as we kind of talk about employee questions, concerns, confusion. I think anybody in here that has had experience with ICHRA, knows the importance of auto pay and setting that up. Talk to me a little bit about how auto pay works with Medicare and potentially how long it takes to actually set that up.
Yeah. So, auto pay is not a thing with Medicare initially. Unless you're on Social Security, you're getting a Social Security check, and then it is automatic. It just automatically comes out. Your Social Security check gets adjusted. If you're without that monthly Social Security, you get that bill for 3 months. You usually have to write an old-fashioned paper check, and good luck finding that in some drawer that's collecting dust, right? That's another hurdle that people face. Like, I have to write a check and put it in the mail. So yes, the answer is yes for the first payment. On the back of their first bill, there are instructions on how to set up Easy Pay. That allows that Medicare eligible employee, in this case, to set up Easy Pay, where they put in their checking account information, and Social Security will ding their checking account for their Part B premium monthly after, moving forward. The thing is, it takes Medicare about 6 to 12 weeks to set up auto pay. So they always have to send that first 3-month bill in with that check, or, pay it directly online, but it's always that first 3-month chunk that's going to hit them. And then they can set up Easy Pay for the next quarter, for the next months moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, that's been just something in general, the importance of auto pay. And then if you have a secondary kind of group like this where, the process is a little bit different, hence the kind of doubling down on having enough time, having a formal process in place and strategy behind how are we going to ensure that we're educating these folks properly and supplying them with the right resources to really cut down on the anxiety of these are things that you have to do. And one of those things might be going down to the Social Security office, which we all know is everybody's favorite thing to do, that and the DMV. So I want to switch then to kind of broker opportunity, because I believe that this actually offers a massive opportunity to brokers, because the future broker is not a product salesperson anymore. The broker, when we talk about these strategies like ICHRA, really becomes an educational strategist, a change manager, a guide through complexity, and really somebody who embodies that strategy versus, hey, here's a spreadsheet with all your options, pick one. Kind of go deep into some areas. We talked a little bit about this, where you view the broker opportunity really existing, because it's really, in a nutshell, a broker who understands kind of and has the ability to translate between employer HR and strategy and federal compliance reality is going to be dangerous comparatively to a broker who can't do that. And it really puts them in a position where they're really looked at as being indispensable.
Absolutely. Just from my personal experience as an HR person, renewal time came around, you did your census, sent it to the broker put it out to market, you came back with a spreadsheet and you picked the plan that the plan design looked pretty good and the price was, you could stomach the price. Now with an ICHRA, you really have to partner with that client, right? ICHRA is still, all things considered, a small portion of the employee benefit universe. But when a company decides to jump into the ICHRA world, they don't know what to expect. And that is something that the broker can absolutely bring to the relationship that they've never had to do before, because a group plan was a group plan, whether it was Humana or United, it didn't matter. The experience was the same. Jumping off into ICHRA it's scary. It's scary for everybody involved, whether they're telling you that or not. I don't know, but it is unnerving, and it does provoke some anxiety to the client. So, probably the first time they're hearing ICHRA is when you introduced it and they asked you, how do you spell that and what does it stand for, right? And then you're jumping in and giving them all the logistics of it. So, really being the translator of what are the differences, what can they expect to feel in their everyday life, with going from a group plan to an ICHRA, and what can they do to prepare their employees for that transition as well.
Yep, agreed. I view the bottom line is the Medicare ICHRA convergence really creates a new category of broker value. So it's no longer the who has the best plan, but it's how do we design, how do we transition, how do we manage coverage across an aging and diverse workforce without creating compliance or cost risk. I think that is where a broker stops being a vendor and really becomes that indispensable advisor. This is strategy work, and one that I think with a little bit of, partnering with the right folks, educating yourself, you can be very dangerous in terms of one, protecting your current book of business, but also the opportunity to bring in new clients because you are a subject matter expert in this area, as well as have folks on your side that can position you as such. Moving then kind of into our final section, I think this is a big one because it's really, when this is in action, what does a successful Medicare ICHRA rollout actually look like? My view at Savvy is the best implementations have a couple things in common. Early planning. I know we're a broken record on that. I'm going to keep saying I think strong employee communications, getting ahead of this. One of the things we like to jokingly, yet not jokingly, talk about is you are not going to speed up Medicare, no matter how big the client is. The next thing I would say is having Medicare-specific education for these folks, because there's more paths, if you will. There's more steps than historically or the portion of the employees that are going to be non-Medicare related.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the big difference makers, needle movers, Heather, that I would say is having that white glove support that we realized by partnering with you is the night and day difference. Yes, you can certainly send out a one page with links that folks can navigate out to resources and try their best to sign up for that. I'll go so far as guaranteeing that will not go well. So having somebody that knows how to navigate through that, can calm the anxiety, and ensure that they get through it successfully is really been the key to how we've navigated this at Savvy. And then really, you've touched on this, time for employees to actually process the fact that there's change here. Because really, from our perspective, employees that make the transition onto Medicare are in a fantastic situation in the end. And just educating them on what that change is and not to be fearful of it. Because a lot of these folks have potentially held out on making that transition historically. But talk through kind of from your perspective, how do you set yourself up for success here and implement this and execute it on it so it's a positive versus a fall on your face moment?
Yeah, like you said, and I would probably scream it from the mountaintop if I could, but the early planning is key to everything because, the reality of the situation is if there's not enough time for that employee to get their Medicare approval from Social Security, right? And they already have Medicare Part A, they potentially are going to feel like, even though it won't be the reality, they're going to feel like they have a gap in coverage. And nobody wants that for their employee. So really that early planning to me is just critical to give them enough time. Strong communication you touched on, but I would add that as the broker that understands an ICHRA and, having gone through that, tell that client what to anticipate and help them develop their communications to address, what some of those pain points are going to be for their employees, coming up. So you can just get ahead of that. White glove support is huge. You are spot on with, here's an email. I see a lot of email communications go out sometimes and, here's a link and then the employee doesn't do it. And then, we're looking at the employee sometimes going, well, we sent you the email. Like what's wrong? The reality is they are shut down emotionally. And I know I've talked a lot about emotion, but I feel like it's kind of undervalued because they're upset, they're anxious, they're not in a headspace to listen. They're not in a headspace to react a lot of times. And so sending an email or a text message, it doesn't do the trick. They want to have a phone call with somebody typically, or at least have an appointment on the books that they know they're going to talk to a human to be able to ask their questions and not just have to go through a process. So I think that is huge. We've been on the phone with people that it is not uncommon for us to have a 15-minute phone call with somebody initially, and we literally hear them exhale on the other end of the phone, or we are on a Zoom call and we see them go, okay, it's going to be okay. We see that physical exhale, which is great. That's why we do what we do because it's awesome to see. So just providing that support for them, I think is key. And the last thing I'll say is having, if it's a group that you have that has, a handful of Medicare people, maybe carving them out for their own education session. A lot of times the under 65 or those that aren't eligible for Medicare are having their own information sessions and education. Having one for the Medicare people because they like to know that they're in it with somebody else. There's that camaraderie. And so, setting up those types of sessions concurrently with what's going on with everybody else in the population, I think is a huge positive as well.
Yeah, I would double down on that. Not only are you going through the change management of just, hey, we're implementing an ICHRA, but to your point, having that for your sub 65 population, but then because this is a different path, we found a lot of success in getting that group together to explain some of the basics. And I've definitely seen that physical exhale.
Yeah.
And I understand how gratifying that could be. So
it's a real thing.
Well, I know there was a ton of information presented here today, and kind of what I want to leave everybody with is ICHRA and Medicare is not something to fear, but it is something to be handled very intentionally. The employers and brokers that win in this market are going to be the ones that combine technology, education, compliance, and human support. We are big believers at Savvy in the human support aspect. We often refer to ourselves as a highly tech-enabled, a highly tech-enabled service company. And I think that's the key to moving into ICHRA in general is ICHRA is consumer-driven healthcare. How do we make it consumer-friendly? And I think by combining those aspects, what you're really doing there is you're creating confidence. Confidence is going to ultimately design or drive that successful adoption of a new strategy. So with that, I really appreciate everybody joining today. And I also appreciate everybody's patience with the technical difficulties we had at first. I know a lot of people saw a Zoom link. We changed it to Google Meet. Being that we only have 6 minutes remaining, I'm going to encourage everybody that has questions, if you can throw those into the chat. We'll try to get through a couple of those with the time remaining. But what I will note is we're going to gather all of those up and we're actually going to put them into a singular document, answer each of them, and then distribute that to everybody who had the opportunity to attend today's call. So go ahead and throw your questions into the chat if you have them. If you're not kind of feeling that right now, you can certainly reach out independently if you have one-off questions or you want to meet and talk about a specific situation. But this is kind of the first of many of these types of webinars we're going to be doing at Savvy. So another thing that you'll see as a takeaway outside of the questions is if you have topics specifically that have caused confusion for you or just something you'd love a little bit of a deeper dive on, don't hesitate to provide that feedback. This is not, and these webinars are not designed to talk about Savvy. These webinars are designed to talk about ICHRA and specifically the nuances and kind of confusion areas or opportunity areas that can help us to drive clarity in this new employee benefit strategy. So super appreciate everybody coming on today. Keep an eye out in your email. We'll be distributing those kind of components. This obviously is recorded as well today. So you'll be seeing more stuff coming your way, but really appreciate the support and hopefully everybody has something they took away today. And thank you, Heather. Appreciate you being the subject matter expert that you are.
Yes, it's been great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.